Welcome to the Triskele podcast.
We are three druids gathered in a virtual grove
to share our thoughts and our path with you.
Hi, welcome to episode 15 of the Triskele podcast. If you are a new listener or viewer, welcome. And if you're returning, welcome back. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like being a solitary and how you find connection while actually practicing on your own. But first, let's do introductions. My name is Victoria. My pronouns are she and her.
Hi, I'm Drum, and my pronouns are he and him.
I'm Amber, and my pronouns are she and her.
And as I said today, we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be solitary and how you find that connection. All three of us are primarily solitary practitioners, so we're not going to dig into the specific mechanics of practicing as a solitary, because we're sure you've heard a lot about that if you've listened to our previous podcasts. But in the meantime, we're still part of something bigger than ourselves. We aren't pagans because we don't want to deal with anybody else. We want to be hermits in the woods and just do our own thing. There are people who are like that. That's not us. And so how do we find that connection, whether it's to our gods, to our faith, to the group of people who practice like us in our traditions, or the greater pagan community as a whole?
I guess for myself, electronic media is really the way I do that, especially today. I mean, in the past, it's been more going to events like festivals or going to rituals, for example, that would get me into a community. But it really is the electronic community that's made it easy over the many years, just because there's like-minded people that we could meet on, let me age myself or date myself, bulletin boards or chat rooms or, eventually email and Facebook. So it's the electronic community where I find my connection most readily and easily these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the advent of the internet has I think, made it a lot easier to be a solitary pagan and to not feel quite so alone. Growing up, there weren't pagan books available in the town that I grew up in or anything like that. So having, Yahoo groups or chat rooms and stuff where I started allowed me to meet people initially, to know that I wasn't alone and just, crazy. But even now, like one of the things that I actually do is I work with individual, most of the time other solitary members, and we each take parts of a ritual and I piece them all together and I post them to share with other people. And so even though we're all solitary and in our own spaces, we're all doing a ritual together in our own time and in our own place. And so, doing those sort of collaborative activities for me has become really meaningful and really, really important.
I've been a part of some of those videos, and it is really kind of cool to see how it all comes together. And we're all working within the same tradition, and so we have very similar ritual structures, but each of us still have our own twists on it. And yet it still works together as a good ritual, which is really kind of cool. I know for myself, the first real group, I want to say, that I was part of was in college. I somehow randomly lucked out in getting pagan roommates. Not quite sure how I pulled that off, but it worked out really well. And it had pagan roommates and I had Jewish roommates. And we all were just like, we're just going to get along. And we made it all work. And it was very, very cool. But then when I was out of college, I ended up with an online community, which is actually still active today, called Sacred Mists. And they're a Wiccan group. And they weren't Sacred Mists at the time. There was something else, and they got bought out by the woman who's currently running it. But it was kind of nice to have this online community where you were learning the same traditions, you were learning the same stuff, and you got to talk to each other. Admittedly, it was all very asynchronous. I remember the first online rituals I ever attended were 100% text. And it was a very, very different experience from the rituals that I attended just last week online. And so it's really interesting, I find, how my connection has sort of evolved as the technology has evolved, in that it's easier to find that connection. I mean, we had to have technology evolve quite a bit in order to even film this podcast and not have it sound really weird and have Ember having to edit 3 separate audio files together and try not to go completely crazy. And instead we all get on the app that we all use for work and hit record and go for it. Just makes
I'm just trying to think of like telephone line recording. Like, it would be so bad.
Yeah, no, I try not to, wouldn't even want to think about it. Wouldn't even try. That would be insane.
No.
Yeah, my first forays into community really were print-based. You know, they were in the early days. It was magazines or periodicals that, or mailings that really fueled my paganism. Much of that with ADF and Circle Sanctuary. They were 2 groups that I joined and got their publications, and was able to reach out kind of indirectly through that way. It was through the post. So become a long way. And then I did it in the 90s. I did some rituals that were text-based, but were international. People from Canada, people from Dubai, all together in the ritual, and it was actually pretty cool. And then and the ability to actually talk to people, and now especially to see people at the same time, it was really a bonus. It's a wonderful boon. It just it enhances the experience so much, so much greater. Instead of the community of the mind, it's community of the eyes and sight. You can see it as well as it's television as opposed to radio or text.
Well,
Which I think is really powerful, because there's so much that's easily misconstrued in text. You can't really read tone. And as someone like me who really, really loves sarcasm, it's really painful to try to get across in any sort of text communication. So I am so grateful for like actual voice of communication and video communication at this point.
I find it interesting. One of the things, especially as we've been through the last year together, and folks are moving more and more online with their rituals, there's been a really great, I think, acceptance of the value of online rituals and the fact that you can have good experiences, spiritual connected experiences online, and you don't have to have them in person. They're not the same as in person, and they certainly take different techniques to get there. But I've had some amazing experiences with online rituals.
Yeah, well, and I think, at least as far as ADF rituals go, so part of what we do is we recreate the sacred center. And part of what that means is that we're in the same, even though we may not physically be in the same place at the same time, in those rituals, we're creating a space where we're all in the same place at the same time. So even though we're not physically in a room sharing that energy in that form, there is at least a portion of the ritual that is specifically intended to aid in that process. So I find that helpful to consider.
Yeah, and in a lot of Wiccan circles, I know that in the Wiccan traditions that I was trained in, one of the things that we would say as we formed the circle is that we are in a time that is not a time, and a place that is not a place. And it's very much the same sort of concept, is we're in this nebulous location that is connected to everything, and all centers, to put it in ADF terms, all centers are connected, all right? All the circles are connected. And so you have that ability to work where your energies are connected in a way that your bodies may not be able to be.
Right. I think the thing I like about the Sacred Center is that it's the idea is more ubiquitous than it is, separated. We're everywhere kind of at the same time, or we're at the same place. And I really like that notion of that interconnectedness, even if you're not in the same place. It's a powerful concept, and shared in other traditions, as you say.
Right.
It's kind of cool.
And if you want to go a little bit, scientific/pagan crazy, the internet is run by electrons, and it's a bunch of electricity pushing stuff around. And in our bodies are pretty much run by a bunch of electricity pushing stuff around. So it's not that much difference.
It is. It's science and practice all mixed together.
And please don't send us hate mail. Yes, I understand organic versus inorganic and the whole thing. I have a life sciences degree. If you get it, I'm highly simplifying.
Yeah, the first hate mail we get is because Victoria said that we're like computers.
Biology professors will yell at me. I did get an A in biochemistry. Yes, but I do find it really interesting how we can still find that connection over the internet, and we don't, or over written text. I'm actually I find the meta-ness of this is hilarious. I am in a Facebook group that is run by members of a worldwide online organization to write pen and paper letters to each other.
I love it. That's so cool.
I think it's kind of fun. Because letter write, there's a different kind of energy in writing letters to each other. There's a different kind of energy in writing a prayer for someone, in doing the online rituals, in doing rituals all at the same time. So for example, in ADF, we have a full moon coming up, and Drum actually started this, and I'm sort of keeping it going at the moment, is I think it's important.
It is.
We do healing rituals at the full moon. And there's a little prayer you say, and you can riff on it if you want, but it's the full moon, wherever you are, whenever it makes sense for you, you do it. And so there is this sort of 24-hour-ish period where people all around the world are doing healing prayers. And we're not the only ones that do something on the full moon. There's a lot of other groups that will do that kind of work. So here you have people from all of these traditions, all around the world, all doing work for healing and peace and restoration all around the full moon. And you've got, it just gives me chills just thinking about all of it. But and you get all of the energy. There's something, I don't know, synergistic about it. That it's not just one person doing it, because we're all doing it together. There's that added layer of knowing that more people are doing this. And so there's more to it than just what you're putting out in the world.
I think that's beautiful, because it expands the whole notion of, this online presence that's bigger than ourselves and that we can participate in. It's really fabulous. I love that. I love that ritual style, actually. And it's something we can experiment with and refine. And so I'm glad we have that ability.
Yes, experimenting with ritual tech. It's fun.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a sandbox, the virtual ritual sandbox.
I keep threatening to throw up a green screen and try crazy things the next time I'm leading one of those online rituals.
I think that'd be awesome. I'd look forward to it.
I tried doing that for the in-bulk ritual that Amber's putting together, but there was too much green in my shirt, and so my shirt started to vanish. It just didn't work out.
You're just a floating head. It's great.
Yeah, maybe I'll do that next time. I do want to, well, actually, before I shift topics slightly, Amber, did you have anything you wanted to add to this, since you've been a little quiet for the last little bit?
Not really. I mean, I think that I have the advantage, not to harp on it too much, that, I'm a bit younger than both of you. And so I grew up with the internet. I was 18 when I joined my first online pagan group, because they were available. And so for me, it's been a lot more about finding resources than it has been finding people. Because like I said, I grew up in a tiny town, so there wasn't massive libraries, and interlibrary loan wasn't really quite a thing. And even if it was, in a town of 300 people, you don't go to the librarian and be like, hey lady, I know I'm a weirdo, can I have some books that prove that I'm a weirdo? So the internet made it so that I could look up things that I couldn't really talk to anybody else about. And that for me was so important. And it's still so important. Every time I'm looking for some information for a study program, or just because I'm a nerd and want to learn something new, the internet is my friend. Now,
Internet is great.
interlibrary loan and all of those are wonderful tools. Not saying don't use them.
Libraries are still amazing, and there's
Absolutely.
lots of stuff you can use. Pagan, not pagan, just tons of stuff you can use from a library when you can get to them. Ours are currently not allowed. But so you talked about getting resources on the internet, and I realize you're younger than us. However, you're still not that young, and so when you got started, the internet was a very different thing from when it is now.
Oh yeah, GeoCities pages popping up all over.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, the MySpace pages, the psychedelic MySpace pages. Oh,
Hey, I spent a lot of time working on my MySpace page. Okay, that's where I learned HTML.
I don't know why all the pagan pages seem to have to be psychedelic. It was hurtful. Oh, but anyway, nowadays there's anybody can create a podcast or host a video or write a paper and share it online. And where you get it isn't always easy to differentiate between the who the heck are you and why are you saying that? You don't make any sense. And the people that actually are worth listening to for you. Different people have different people that are worth listening to, depending on who you are, what you're looking for, and where you're coming from. How do you figure out what the right sources for you are?
So I have the advantage that I graduated from college in 2015 again. So I had to learn how to do that from a scholarly standpoint. And so some of that is as simple as, instead of just using Google, use Google Scholar to do your searching and that sort of stuff, to find that more academic bend to things. But sometimes it is, again, it's sort of like what we talked about when we talked about continuing education. You know, how do you determine whether an author is worth teaching you things or not? You know, seeing what their background is, learning who they are. You know, if it's someone who has a good background, even if it's not necessarily a scholar background, you know, sometimes it takes a little bit of research into where the source is coming from.
I do find it really interesting, though, listening to people's sort of personal opinion. And there's a lot of Discords. I like Discord. And so I'm on a lot of Discord servers, most of which are pagan oriented or knitting, and most of them have sections where you can talk about, this is my thoughts, this is my experiences, this is my opinions, UPG if you would like, but I hate that term because it makes it sound like you made it up as opposed to expressing an experience you had.
I'm also going to point out that was our first swear and it wasn't me. And I'm so happy right now. It's not even funny.
I've had a very challenging day. I think it's also really valuable that we pay attention to people's experiences, whether or not they're actually validated in the lore or they're verified by other folks. Because someone's experiences are, well, your experience is valid because it's your experience. Your interpretation, we can negotiate about interpretation, but the experience is still your experience, and no one can tell you otherwise. But understanding that interpretation and actually having the conversations with folks can help really bring something out about how you view things, and it can help them understand how they're viewing things. And it also adds that layer of connection. So we had one Discord channel that I'm currently on. We were chatting about Cernunnos and different people's opinions of him. And I found out there's somebody else who also works with Caradwyn and Cernunnos. And I'm like, this is cool, because I didn't know anybody else who did that. Now I have a connection to somebody. And I also have a connection to other people who view Cernunnos in the way that I do, which is not the Wiccan fertility god. And so now there's more people that I now feel this connection to because we have something in common. And we would have never known that if we weren't discussing our experiences and and our interpretations in a way that allows for people to actually have conversations about them. And that kind of connection is also really valuable, I find.
I agree. I think it's good to learn about, as long as it's clearly presented that this is my opinion, this is my experience, and not that this is what it is, or this is based on ancient practice or whatever, whatever false information might be tied to those sometimes, because that happens. I've read more than one book where someone is clearly stating their personal experiences and tried to present them as based from historic context that just doesn't exist. And that's where I have a problem with it most of the time.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I don't, I'm a neo-pagan. I do consult the lore to see what people may have done, but what I do today, is really a result of where I am and today, and somewhat those ancient practices. So I know that the practices that I've kind of developed organically, I'm going to continue to do because they work for me. But it does help me if I'm talking to someone else and they say, you know what, I've experienced this. I mean, there's been discussions I've had with Amber about the Hittites where Amber will say something and I'll be like, yeah, that's my experience as well. And it enriches my experience because I feel that someone else has also experienced that. And it's kind of it's kind of a buttress in a way for my practice, because it's like, wow, it's not just me. It's not just me here as the solitary on an island alone in space, but I'm doing something that someone else sees as well.
Well, and I think as a solitary, that's a really important part of that connection for me, because sometimes when you're in, your bedroom or your office or wherever you're doing ritual and you're by yourself and you're not communicating with other people, suddenly you really start to question, what am I doing? Am I losing my mind? What is this? And so sometimes getting that outside person to say, no, I'm there too. We're good. And not everyone needs that. I know I need that. I need to occasionally hear someone say, oh, you're not. No, I've experienced that too, or I've seen that, or I've had that connection, or whatever. For me, that's really validating for my practice.
Yeah, it's really nice to know that other people are also experiencing this. When you talk about like how you have a relationship with the gods and you feel their response, not always in words, it's often just like a intuition feeling, at least it is for me. You're like, is that real? Am I just crazy? Is that just because? And then you talk to somebody else and they have a similar experience, grounded in lore or not. But as Drum said, we are pagans in today's world, practicing as it makes sense for us. And being able to say, well, look, somebody else did the same thing and got a similar kind of result. Okay, maybe I'm not crazy. This is cool. All right, great. Let's talk about our experiences and see how we can inform each other and deepen them. And both of us end up coming away, or more of us, depending on how many people are in the conversation, with a new appreciation, a new flavor, a new depth in that connection, both in the practice or with the practice, as well as with each other. It's just, and knowing that we're not alone.
I've actually had that same type of experience with lore. So there's been, I work a lot with Demeter and the Uilleand mysteries and that whole cycle of the year and stuff. And as some of my work there, I found this in my brain, in my work, I found this weird connection between Demeter and a labyrinth. And, for me, that was very much a UPG thing, a thing that was just in my brain, part of my personal work. But as I started to look into it a little bit, I found that that's not necessarily the case. There's actually coins from Greece that have Demeter on one side and then have the labyrinth on the other. So there's direct connection to those deities that I wasn't aware of before I had the experience and started looking into where it might come from. So, I mean, I've had that connection with lore as well as with other people, which I always find fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the experiences I had, speaking of the Eleusinian mysteries, was when I was studying it, and I was very fortunate to have Amber kind of as a mentor for me. I would tell her about experiences, and she would say to me, "I don't want to talk about that right now." And basically, it was because it was an anticipation of what I was going to find. And as the mysteries unfolded, I found that my experiences really did fit into this kind of chronicle of things that were happening. And it was at the end of the road, I was able to look back at the beginning of the road and say, "Oh my goodness, this made sense." And so it was nice to have that kind of connection. Plus, I think there are like three kinds of experiences. There are experiences that we have that are so so real that they're real to us, and there's no question in our minds that these experiences have, absolute solidity in our experience. Maybe not recreatable, but they're solid. And then we have other experiences that are fleeting, and we're like, wow, what really was that? But there's those in between experiences that are kind of a little bit of both. And then when we talk to somebody else and they have those same experiences, or they can say that there's validity to that those things, take on a new life of their own. And that's so huge, especially in individual work. I think it makes individual work, it broadens it into work with others.
Well, and admittedly, like, so me not sharing my experiences early on as you were working through that was sort of twofold. One, I didn't want to um, use the word taint. I didn't want to like change your experience because I told you what I saw. I didn't want to influence it. I wanted it to be your experience. But part of that was also purely selfish because I wanted to see if they did the same thing, even if I didn't say anything.
Right.
Part of it was me validating what my brain said. So for me, that was kind of a twofold thing, and it worked out really cool. So
It did. Thank you, Amber.
It's nice to be able to talk to people about it and to be able to have conversations about these different beings that, maybe we don't actually have a whole lot of lore about. Or maybe what lore we have is confusing. We'll take a goddess and turn it into a sex object, and then somehow all of the boy gods do whatever she says. Freya. So, like there's all of these weird, sometimes the myths don't make sense. And so you're trying to puzzle through it and figure out what it actually means. And having people who have had similar, or who are willing to share their experiences, and you discover that you have similar experiences, or you discover you have different experiences. And then you dig into that and like, okay, why did you have a different experience than me? Was it just a different angle, a different aspect? Sometimes it's just a different interpretation of a very similar experience. All that gets really, I'm fascinated by all of that. I should have gotten a psych degree instead of a zoology degree, but
I think it's interesting that the shared practice component, that we find, and I think you're really right about the idea of some of the more the deities that don't have a lot of details. I mean, with some of the lore is really fractional, and it's really hard to approximate some of the things that you can find. But I know that some of the deities I work with, I don't really find a lot of other people that work with them, if any. But it's nice to find someone else that you can bounce the ideas off of. So it's that shared value, shared practice is huge.
And I
As
think
occurred.
that's the part that gets missed a lot is the solitary, especially if you're someone who's just getting out there and just trying to learn. I know for me, it was really hard to share my experiences because I worried about judgment. I worried about people thinking that I wasn't a legitimate practitioner, or that my experiences were made up, or any sort of insecurity. I mean, for me, that was a big hurdle to try to overcome. Even and that's it's not as anonymous now, but that was part of the value of the internet at the time for me, is that I could be who I wanted to be. Nobody needed to know that I was an 18-year-old kid who didn't know anybody else that was pagan. I could share my experiences behind I mean, a pagan name at the time that I will not ever share. And, you know, and share those a little bit anonymously. And I think that certain things like Discord still provide some of that ability. You know, you can share your experiences and not necessarily have to out who you are right away. So if you're concerned about that, there's options.
That's a really good point, because I know that early on, I found nothing more damaging to me than someone to say, no, you're wrong, especially when it was about something that I believed, and it's like, and so a lot of times that would put me off or would drive me away from a group. It was really the reason I became the list master in ADF, was because, I was tired of people saying, no, you're wrong to other people and then leaving. Because when you tell someone that they're wrong, there's the element of despair. All of a sudden you've kind of deflated their balloon, and, that sometimes people go away because of that. So I think,
especially if that ends up being someone that you think of as an authority, or someone who is, an elder, or, someone, I don't want to use above, but someone more experienced than you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think saying I've never thought of it that way is a lot nicer than no, that's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to say that you disagree with someone without saying no, that you're wrong.
Right.
Right.
That's a sharp sword.
The one I like is, interesting. Can you help me understand where you're coming from?
That's actually good, because it gives you the opportunity to hear what people are saying. That's exactly. A great one. That's beautiful.
Well, and honestly, if somebody's wrong, getting them to unpack it usually helps them figure out where they're wrong on their own without me having to say anything.
Right. No, brilliant.
And then they feel smart because they figured it out.
Yep.
And I don't need to go tell people they're wrong. It's A, not my place. B, I don't actually know what their experiences are, so I don't actually know. And I sure as heck can't tell anybody that they didn't have an experience that they said they had, because I have no clue.
I know one of the things that's helped me as a solitary practitioner, not only the benefits of community from others, is online libraries and online resources. I think just because I follow Celtic Path, just to name drop, maryjones.us has this extensive, sources of information from Celtica. And it's a great resource. And even Wikipedia, I mean, follow the sources at the bottom, and it's, I used to go to the library when I was a kid. I don't have to do that anymore because it's available to me online. And as a solitary practitioner, it's a huge help.
So I think that's probably going to bring us to the end of our conversation here. As a quick reminder to folks, personal practice is a really big part of being a solitary practitioner, and we have a video on that somewhere. It will be linked, probably down in the down below in the towel section. And always feel like you can reach out. Pagan groups advertise publicly because they're looking for additional people. So whether they're online, local, not local, especially lately, it really doesn't matter. If it's on Zoom, it can be anywhere in the world. Feel free, check out places. If you're using Zoom, you can always change your name. They don't have to know who you are. If you're on Discord, again, change your name if you're not comfortable being out and public. But I do encourage you to try to reach out to other pagans, other people in your tradition, or people who practice similarly to you, to talk to them about your experiences and just see what you have in common and get a little bit of connection and community that way. And so for this week, we will, as usual, now do a divination to give you some tips and suggestions and guidance for the next few weeks. And Drum's going to pull Ogham.
It's going to be Ogham. Surprise, surprise.
Hey, occasionally you surprise us.
Yeah. Well, maybe next time I'll do something different. Maybe. All right. Let me draw my Ogham. Well, I have 3 Ogham, and this will be our wisdom for the the week or so ahead, the few weeks ahead. The first one that I have is called Uilleand. And for me, Uilleand is about it's about coming to understand something. It's about hidden wisdom that will come, that we kind of move through. It's not like a singular event, but it's a process that we go through where we discover something that we previously hadn't known. And I think that as we move through these next few weeks, I think that something will be revealed to us, something revelational that will make a difference in our lives. The second omen is Coll, and Coll is for me is the hazel tree, and it's the tree of nurturing and wisdom. As the hazelnuts fell into the pool where the salmon of wisdom were lying, those nuggets or those nuts of wisdom were consumed and brought wisdom forth. And I think it's also I see that pool of water as something very nurturing. So I think that going along with that first omen, I think that wisdom is coming our way, knowledge and wisdom. And finally, the last omen is Muin, the vine, and this talks about prophecy and reaching out. So I think that there's wisdom to be found from the universe. I think there's wisdom to be found from those things that fall into our laps, and I think that there's wisdom to be found for reaching out and using divination as a tool for understanding. So wisdom is coming your way. That's what I see.
Thank you all for listening to us today, and we look forward to chatting with you again in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for joining us for today's video. If you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. You can also find more episodes on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast providers. You can find us on social media on Facebook and Twitter, or for more information, visit our website, triskelepodcast.weebly.com.